The wasteland stretched endlessly under a burning, broken sky. Dust storms rolled across the cracked earth, hiding dangers and lost souls alike. Far from the main cities, only the desperate dared to live. Daniel adjusted the strap of his gear pack as he walked along the edge of the human refugee camp. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. Just a man trying to survive in a world where survival was no longer promised. He liked to patrol the camp's borders alone. It gave him peace. It kept his mind sharp. But today felt different. Today, the wind carried more than dust. It carried a sound. Faint, broken, a whimper, a cry. Daniel stopped. He listened carefully. There it was again. A soft, pained voice carried on the wind. Without hesitation, he turned toward it. He found her near the broken fence. A figure collapsed in the dirt, half hidden by the swirling dust. As Daniel moved closer, his heart clenched. It was a woman. Not human. Her skin was a soft, pale silver, bruised and scratched. Strange markings ran along her arms. Signs of another world, another people. Her clothes, once beautiful armor, were torn and stained with blood and dirt. She tried to lift herself, trembling violently, but her body betrayed her, and she fell back into the dirt with a soft cry. Daniel approached slowly, hands open to show he meant no harm. When she saw him, her eyes widened in panic. She crawled weakly toward him, dragging herself through the dust. Before Daniel could say a word, she grabbed the hem of his jacket, her voice cracked with shame and desperation. "Please make me your personal slave," she whispered, her forehead pressing into the dirt. Daniel froze. For a long moment, he couldn't find his voice. Around them, the wasteland howled with the bitter wind. He crouched down, studying her closely. She was injured and badly. Blood oozed from cuts on her back and legs. Her breathing was shallow and quick. Her hands, once probably elegant and strong, now shook like leaves in a storm. Daniel saw no pride left in her, only fear, only brokenness. She wasn't begging because she wanted to. She was begging because somewhere along the way, someone had taught her that this was her only worth. The thought made Daniel's stomach turn with anger. Not at her, but at whoever had done this to her. Gently, he reached out. She flinched violently, expecting a blow. Instead, Daniel slid his arm under her shoulders and lifted her up carefully. "You don't have to be anyone's slave," he said softly. The alien woman blinked at him, confused. She didn't understand. Not yet. Her whole body was stiff, ready for punishment, ready for commands. Daniel ignored the curious and suspicious looks from a few camp guards nearby. He carried her through the broken gates, straight toward his own tent. Let them whisper. Let them judge. He knew what he was doing, and he wasn't going to let her die out there. Inside his small, battered tent, Daniel laid her gently on a pile of worn blankets. He grabbed a bottle of clean water from his supplies and held it to her lips. She hesitated, then sipped carefully, her eyes watching him like a cornered animal. Daniel moved slowly, showing every action before he did it. He found an old med kit and began cleaning her wounds. Some cuts were deep, others were old scars, signs of long, silent suffering. She didn't speak. She didn't resist. It was as if she didn't believe she had the right. Daniel worked carefully, speaking in a calm, low voice. "You're safe here," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." Still, she flinched at every touch. Still, she looked at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. When he finished cleaning the worst of her wounds, he covered her with another blanket. She shivered under it, her body trying to understand warmth that wasn't followed by pain. Daniel sat back on his heels and studied her. She was beautiful even in her brokenness, but it wasn't her looks that caught him. It was her spirit, bruised, battered, but somehow still burning. She was alive, and that mattered. Outside, the camp slowly returned to its broken routine. Scavengers bargained over scrap metal. Guards shouted at beggars. Children played in the dirt with sticks. No one came to check on Daniel. No one cared about the alien woman he had carried in. And maybe that was good. Because for now it was just the two of them. Two lost souls in a world that had forgotten how to be kind. Daniel leaned against the tent pole, his muscles aching from the day's work. The woman stirred, her voice so soft he almost missed it. "Master, what are your orders?" Daniel closed his eyes for a long moment, pain flashing through him. When he opened them, he met her gaze steadily. "No orders," he said. "Just rest." Her lips trembled. For the first time she looked truly confused, not afraid, just lost. Daniel gave her a small, tired smile. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." And for the first time, in that broken wasteland under a dying sky, the seeds of something stronger than fear were planted. Trust. The camp outside moved on without noticing the broken alien woman hidden inside Daniel's tent. Traders shouted. Guards barked orders. The world kept spinning as if no one cared about the pain left behind. Inside the small shelter it was different. Here, time slowed. Here, healing, slow, painful healing, had begun. Daniel knelt beside the woman, carefully checking the bandages he had wrapped around her arms and legs. The wounds were deep but clean now. She was breathing better, though her body still shook from weakness. He offered her more water. She hesitated, glancing at him as if waiting for a command. Daniel didn't give one. He simply placed the bottle within her reach and sat back. After a long, uncertain moment, she reached for it herself. Her hands trembled, but she drank without needing permission. Daniel smiled quietly. It was a small step, but it was hers. Later, when she drifted into restless sleep, Daniel sat near the entrance of the tent, sharpening a dull knife with a broken stone, not because he expected trouble immediately, but because habits kept him alive. As he worked, he thought about her, about the way she had collapsed at his feet, about the shame in her voice when she begged him to make her his slave. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew enough. He had seen the signs before, on other worlds, in other broken camps. Slavery, abuse, desperation so deep that freedom felt like a curse instead of a blessing. Daniel's hands tightened around the blade. Whoever had done this to her, he would have words with them one day, if they were lucky. The soft rustling of cloth pulled Daniel from his thoughts. He turned and saw her sitting up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Underneath, the full truth of her suffering was revealed. Not just bruises and cuts. Scars. Deep, ugly scars. They marked her back, her ribs, even her wrists. Thin white lines crossing silver skin like cruel maps of past pain. Daniel felt anger burn inside him. Not at her. Never at her. At the monsters who had treated a living being like something, to be used and discarded. The woman noticed his stare. Quickly, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself, lowering her head in shame. Daniel put down the knife and moved closer, keeping his movements slow, careful. "You don't have to hide," he said softly. She didn't answer. She just pressed the blanket tighter, her hands trembling. Daniel sat cross-legged on the ground, keeping a respectful distance. "You were hurt," he said, "but you're not broken." Still, no response, only silence, and the heavy weight of old pain filling the air between them. Minutes passed. Then, in a voice so small he almost missed it, she spoke. "My name," she whispered, her accent thick. "Arissa." Daniel smiled gently. "Arissa," he repeated, letting the name settle in the space between them. "It's a strong name." Arissa looked up at him briefly, confusion flickering in her tired eyes. Strong? No, one had called her strong before. Only weak, only slave, only property. Daniel pointed to himself. "Daniel," he said. "Just Daniel. No master, no orders." Arissa frowned slightly, trying to understand this strange human who offered nothing but kindness. She was trained to obey, to fear, to expect pain after every soft word. But Daniel's hands only healed. His voice only comforted. It was wrong. It was terrifying. And somewhere, deep inside her, it was wonderful. That night, the storm rolled over the camp. Thunder growled in the distance. The winds tore at the old tents. Daniel patched the walls as best he could and checked Arissa's bandages once more. She flinched less this time. Progress. Afterward, he sat by the fire, eating a small piece of dried meat. He offered half to Arissa. Again, she hesitated, waiting, expecting a command. But Daniel only smiled and nodded once. "Eat if you're hungry," he said. Slowly, carefully, Arissa took the food. She nibbled at it, her body tense, her mind screaming that it was a trick. But when no blow came, when no harsh word followed, she relaxed, just a little. Enough to finish the small meal. Daniel watched her with quiet pride. Healing wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. But it had started. And sometimes, the smallest steps were the most important. As the fire burned, low and the camp finally slept, Daniel leaned back against the wall of the tent, staring up at the stars through a torn hole in the canvas. Beside him, Arissa curled into the blanket, her breathing soft and steady. She still flinched in her dreams, still fought invisible battles. But she was alive. She was safe. And tomorrow, she would take another step toward freedom, even if she didn't realize it yet. Daniel closed his eyes, letting sleep take him at last. Tomorrow would be a new fight. But tonight, in the ashes of a broken world, trust had begun to bloom. And trust, once planted, could grow stronger than any chain. Morning came slowly to the broken camp. Gray clouds hung low over the sky. The dust winds had calmed, but the air was still heavy with the smell of ash and old fire. Daniel stirred awake, feeling the familiar ache in his bones. He sat up and checked the tent. Arissa was awake too. She sat quietly in a corner, knees pulled to her chest, the blanket wrapped tightly around her thin frame. Her silver eyes stared at nothing. Not afraid, not angry, just empty. Daniel knew that look. It wasn't the body that needed healing now. It was the soul. He moved carefully, lighting a small fire in the center of the tent and heating some water. He said nothing. No orders. No demands. Just simple, quiet work. From the corner of his eye, he watched Arissa. She didn't move. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't expect anything. She was waiting. Waiting for the moment the kindness would end. Waiting for the orders to start. Waiting for the chains to wrap around her again, even if they weren't made of iron. Daniel handed her a small cup of warm water. She blinked, surprised. Slowly, she reached out and took it with both hands, her fingers brushing his for just a second. She flinched, but Daniel didn't pull away. He simply smiled and sat back, giving her space. Arissa sipped the water carefully, confusion flickering across her tired face. Why was he kind? Why wasn't he claiming her? Why wasn't he making her earn her place like everyone else had? She didn't understand, and it terrified her. Later, Daniel stepped outside to gather scrap wood for the fire. When he returned, he found her on her knees, head bowed low, hands placed neatly on her thighs. The perfect image of submission. Daniel stopped, heart heavy. He set the wood down and crouched in front of her. "You don't have to kneel," he said gently. Arissa didn't move, didn't even lift her head. "I am yours," she said softly, voice hollow. "Command me." Daniel shook his head, slowly. "No," he said. "You are not property. You are Arissa." The name sounded strange in the cold air, as if trying to remind her who she had once been. A long silence followed. Finally, Arissa lifted her head. Her eyes shone with a mix of fear and something else, something fragile. Hope. Daniel sat down, cross-legged in front of her. He pulled a small piece of scrap metal from his pocket and began carving it with a sharp rock. Not a weapon, not a trap, just a simple carving. A habit he had picked up long ago when waiting out storms. Arissa watched him, puzzled. "What are you making?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. Daniel smiled without looking up. "Nothing important," he said. "Just passing time." She frowned. Passing time without orders? Without purpose? It made no sense to her. But still she edged a little closer, curiosity overcoming fear. As the day passed, Daniel spoke to her softly. He told her stories of Earth, of green forests, endless oceans, towering mountains. He told her about rain that fell fresh and clean, about cities lit by thousands of stars. Arissa listened in silence. Slowly her body relaxed. Slowly her mind began to imagine a world beyond chains, beyond pain. A world where she could be something more than what others had forced her to become. When the fire burned low and the night crept back in, Arissa surprised him. She spoke. "Why, do you not command me?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Because you are not a tool," he wanted to say. "Because you are not a thing. Because you deserve better." Instead, he simply said, "Because you are free." The words hung in the air between them. Strange, heavy, dangerous. Freedom was a word Arissa had heard before, but always as a lie, always as something snatched away before she could touch it. Now, hearing it from him, she felt something stir deep inside her chest, something she didn't dare name. Not yet. Later, as they lay on opposite sides of the tent, Arissa stared up at the patched ceiling. She whispered a single promise to herself, so soft that even she barely heard it. "I will learn. I will be more." Outside, the broken world turned slowly under a starless sky. Inside the small, battered tent, something stronger than fear had begun to grow. Not love, not yet, but trust. Fragile, small, precious, and it would be enough. For now. The days that followed moved slowly, like a river crawling over stones. The camp around them stayed loud, rough and dangerous. But inside Daniel's small tent, a different world was quietly being built, one made of small kindnesses and slow healing. Every morning, Daniel would bring clean water and a little food. He would place it near Arissa without a word, then sit back and wait. At first, she didn't know what to do. She would stare at the food, frozen, her mind filled with old rules. Eat only when commanded. Speak only when spoken to. Exist only to serve. But Daniel never gave orders, never raised his voice, only patience, only quiet presence. One morning, Arissa hesitantly reached out for the food without asking. Daniel didn't react. He only smiled, gently, and continued sharpening an old tool. No punishment came, no angry words. Her hand trembled as she brought the food to her mouth. She ate slowly, carefully, as if expecting the ground to break open beneath her. But nothing bad happened. Only silence, only safety. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Arissa ate because she chose to, not because she was told to. It was a small thing, but to her, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing not to fall. Later that day, Daniel found a small broken mirror among the trash piles outside the camp. He brought it back to the tent and cleaned it carefully. Then he placed it in front of Arissa. She stared at it, confused. Daniel sat nearby, quietly repairing a broken boot. Minutes passed. Finally, Arissa looked into the mirror. What she saw made her flinch. The woman staring back at her was pale, thin, bruised. Her once bright silver skin was marked with old scars. Her hair, once probably flowing and beautiful, was tangled and dull. She turned away, shame burning through her. Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes. "You are not your scars," he said softly. Arissa shook her head. tears filling her eyes. "You do not understand," she whispered. "I am ruined." Daniel put down his boot and leaned forward, his voice steady and strong. "You are not ruined," he said. "You are surviving. And surviving is not shame." Arissa didn't answer, but something inside her shifted. Something deep, something she had kept buried for too long. A tiny spark, a question. What if he was right? That night, as the fire burned low, Daniel laid out an extra blanket beside the main one. Without saying a word, he nodded to Arissa, giving her space if she wanted it. She hesitated. Old training told her she had no right to comfort, no right to choice. But Daniel's kindness asked for nothing, no demands, no expectations, just a silent offer. "You are worthy of comfort." Slowly, trembling, Arissa crawled onto the second blanket. Not at his feet, not in chains. Beside him, equal free. Sleep came slowly for her. Her body, trained to expect pain in every quiet moment, flinched at every sound. But each time she woke in panic, Daniel was there, silent, steady, breathing slow, and even a shield against the nightmares. I promised that the past would not touch her here. In the quiet dark, Arissa watched him sleep. She didn't understand him, didn't understand why he cared, didn't understand why he fought for someone broken like her. But she knew one thing now with absolute certainty. He was different. And maybe, just maybe, she could be different too. The next morning, Daniel offered her a choice. He held out a simple piece of cloth, a scarf he had stitched from scraps. "You don't have to hide your face," he said. "But if you want, you can wear this." Arissa touched the cloth, her fingers brushing its soft surface. He wasn't commanding her. He wasn't forcing her. He was giving her the power to choose. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. For a long moment, Arissa did nothing. Then slowly, she lifted the scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders. Not to hide, but to feel the warmth. Daniel smiled, a real, proud smile. And in that moment, Arissa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not because she was owned, not because she was useful, but because she was alive. Outside the tent, the broken world waited, full of danger, full of cruelty. But inside, under the patched roof, and between the battered walls, something new had taken root, something stronger than chains, stronger than fear, hope. And Arissa, once a shadow in the dirt, once a voice begging for ownership, was beginning at last to believe. She was not born to serve. She was born to live. The days grew a little easier. Arissa moved with more confidence now. She helped Daniel gather firewood, cleaned the tent without being asked, and sometimes even smiled. Small, shy smiles that lit up her tired face. Daniel saw the changes and felt quiet pride. She was healing, slowly, steadily. But healing, he knew, was never a straight path, and sometimes the past refused to stay buried. It happened one cold evening. The campfires burned low, and the winds howled through the ruined world. Daniel had just returned from trading supplies when he noticed the shift. The camp was tense. Guards whispered nervously. People avoided eye contact. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Then he saw them. A group of armored figures at the camp's entrance. Cold, brutal men with hard eyes and sharper weapons. Slave hunters. Daniel's heart dropped. He recognized the type. Instantly. He had seen them before on ruined colonies, men who bought and sold living beings like cattle, and worse, he saw their flag. A twisted, cruel mark burned into their armor, the same mark that scarred Arissa's skin. They hadn't just come here by accident. They were looking for someone. They were looking for her. Daniel moved fast. He raced back to the tent, pushing through the crowd. Inside, Arissa sat near the fire, carefully sewing a torn piece of cloth. When she saw his face, Her smile faded instantly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel crouched beside her. "They're here," he said simply. "Your past." For a moment, Arissa went completely still. The color drained from her silver skin. The needle fell from her hand. She hugged her arms around herself tightly, as if trying to vanish into the ground. Daniel grabbed his small pack and began stuffing it with supplies. He handed her a water pouch, a strip of dried food, a worn blanket. She didn't move. She just sat there frozen, broken. The chains she had begun to throw off were wrapping around her again, invisible but heavy. Daniel knelt in front of her and took her shaking hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are not theirs anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But they will take me," she whispered. "They always do." Daniel shook his head. "Not this time." He squeezed her hands tightly. "You are not a slave. You are Harissa." Outside, the camp buzzed with fear. The hunters demanded access, threatened the guards, offered credits for anyone who gave information. Daniel knew they didn't need names, just a face. If they saw her, it would be over. "Can you move?" he asked urgently. Arissa nodded weakly. Her body was still fragile, but her spirit, the part of her Daniel had helped rebuild, sparked again. She stood, swaying slightly, but stayed upright. Daniel wrapped the blanket around her shoulders to hide her features. He pulled a hood over his own head. Then, together they slipped into the shadows of the camp. They moved quickly, using broken walls and abandoned carts for cover. Daniel kept his body between her and the hunters at all times, shielding her from view. He heard shouts behind them. Guards, arguing, hunters cursing. They didn't have much time. The farther they got from the center, the closer they came to the wastelands and freedom. But just as they reached the last broken fence, a hunter spotted them. "There!" the man shouted. Gunfire split the air. Daniel shoved Arissa behind a wall and spun around, pulling a small blaster from his belt. The weapon was old and weak, nothing compared to the hunter's rifles. But Daniel didn't care. He fired. Anyway, 1 shot, 2 shots, not to kill, just to slow them down. He grabbed Arissa's hand and ran, dragging her through the hole in the fence and into the wild, open wastelands beyond. Bullets tore the ground around them. The dust storm rising in the distance was their only hope now, thick enough to hide them if they could reach it. Daniel's lungs burned, his legs screamed for rest, but he didn't stop. Not while she was still beside him, not while there was still a chance. They plunged into the dust storm, coughing and blind. Behind them, angry voices shouted and cursed. But the storm swallowed the sounds whole. They stumbled forward blindly, hands linked, until the shouting faded, until only the wind spoke around them. Finally, Daniel pulled Arissa down behind a fallen piece of machinery. They collapsed together, gasping for air. Arissa curled into herself, sobbing silently. Daniel put an arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the worst of the wind. "You're safe," he whispered fiercely. "You're free." She didn't answer. She just buried her face against his chest, holding on to him like a drowning person holds on to a lifeline. And Daniel held her back, stronger than any chain, steadier than any storm. That night, under a broken sky, Arissa learned something new. Sometimes family wasn't who you were born to. Sometimes it was who stood beside you when the whole world tried to drag you back into the dark. And for the first time in a very long time, she began to believe she could truly be free. The wasteland was endless. The dust storm howled like a living creature, cutting across the broken ground and tearing at Daniel's clothes. But he didn't stop. Arissa moved beside him, wrapped tightly in the blanket, her body weak, but her spirit burning brighter than ever before. Behind them, far across the ruined fields, the slave hunters still searched, hungry, angry, wounded. Daniel knew they wouldn't give up. They had lost face. They had been defied, and monsters like them never forgave that. As night fell, Daniel found a small cave hidden beneath a crumbled ridge. It wasn't much, a hole in the ground barely large enough for 2 people, but it would hide them for a while. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Arissa shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Daniel knelt beside her, his body, exhausted but his mind sharp. He checked the small blaster, 2 shots left. He checked the knife tucked into his belt. Not enough. Not against an entire hunting party, but he had more than weapons. He had a reason to fight. And sometimes that was stronger than any gun. He sat down beside Arissa, who stared at the entrance of the cave with wide, fearful eyes. "They'll find us," she said softly. Daniel didn't lie. He didn't promise safety he couldn't guarantee. Instead, he smiled. A tired, stubborn smile. "Let them come," he said. "We're not running anymore." The hours dragged by. Every sound outside made Arissa flinch. Every gust of wind made Daniel tighten his grip on the knife. Finally, just before dawn, they came. The hunters moved through the wasteland like wolves, their lights cutting through the dust. Voices shouted. Boots stomped. Closer, closer. Daniel stood, placing himself between Arissa and the entrance. He looked down at her and said one word. "Stay." She wanted to argue, wanted to fight beside him, but she saw the look in his eyes. Steady, fierce, unbreakable, and she understood. This was his stand, his choice, his gift. The first hunter appeared at the mouth of the cave, a large figure with a plasma rifle slung across his back. He grinned when he saw Daniel. "Give her up, human," he sneered, "and maybe we let you live." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't move. He simply raised his knife in one hand, the weak blaster in the other. The hunter laughed. "You think you can stop us?" Daniel's voice was calm. "No," he said, "but I can make you bleed." The hunter's grin faded. The first shot came fast. Daniel dodged, firing his blaster. One shot, then another. The blasts hit the rocks, forcing the hunter to duck. Daniel charged forward, using the dust as cover, closing the distance. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything to protect. The knife flashed. The hunter shouted in pain. Another came. Then another. Daniel fought them all. He didn't fight clean. He didn't fight pretty. He fought like a human. Wild, desperate, stubborn beyond all reason. He used fists, rocks, dust, anything he could grab. Every cut, every blow he took, he answered with 10 of his own. Because it wasn't just about winning, it was about standing. It was about showing Arissa, showing the whole broken world, that some things were worth bleeding for. In the chaos, Arissa watched from the shadows, her heart pounding. She saw Daniel fall once, mid hard across the ribs. She saw him stagger to his feet, blood running from a cut on his forehead, and still he fought. Still he refused to bow. Tears streamed down her face. No one had ever fought for her before. Not like this. Not because they wanted something, but because they believed she was worth fighting for. Finally, after what felt like forever, the hunters retreated. Not all of them, but enough. They had tasted Daniel's fire, and they didn't want more. They disappeared into the dust, cursing and spitting. Daniel dropped to one knee, gasping for air. His body was battered, bruised, bleeding, but he was alive, and they were safe. For now. Arissa crawled from the cave and rushed to him. She knelt beside him, hands trembling. You stayed," she whispered. Daniel gave a weak, crooked smile. "Of course," he said. "Family sticks together." She helped him back into the cave, tending his wounds with the last of their supplies. Her hands were gentle but sure. She wasn't the same woman who had collapsed in the dirt days ago. She wasn't the same frightened voice that had begged to be made a slave. She was something more now. Something stronger. That night, under the ruined sky, Daniel and Arissa sat side by side, wrapped in the same blanket against the cold. No chains, no masters, just two souls who had chosen each other, fighting not for survival anymore, but for a future, together. The dust storm finally settled. The wasteland lay silent under a broken sky, scattered with pale stars fighting to shine through the thick clouds. In the small cave hidden beneath the rocks, two figures sat close together, a battered human and a fragile alien woman, wrapped in a single worn blanket sharing warmth and silence. The battle was over, but something far greater had been won: freedom. Daniel slept lightly, exhaustion pulling at him but his instincts never truly resting. Every small sound made him open his eyes, check the entrance, check on her. Arissa, too, did not sleep much. She sat beside him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. Each breath he took was a reminder that someone, a human, had stood between her and death, not for profit, not for power, but for her, for who she was, not for what she could offer. As the first weak light of morning touched the broken land, Arissa moved carefully. She gathered pieces of old cloth, started a tiny fire with the little fuel they had left, and warmed the last of the water. When Daniel stirred awake, he found her waiting, a shy, nervous smile on her face. He sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You're still here," he said, voice rough. Arissa nodded. "I am free," she said, the words strange but sure on her tongue. Daniel smiled, a real wide smile that reached his tired eyes. "Yes," he said simply. "You are." They ate quietly, sharing the last scraps of food. No words were needed. Their survival had already said everything. After breakfast, Arissa did something she had never dared before. She knelt in front of Daniel, not in fear, but in choice. She bowed her head for a moment, then raised it proudly. "I offer you my loyalty," she said, voice strong. "Not as a slave." Daniel looked at her, stunned for a moment. She continued, her silver eyes shining with a fierce light. "I offer you my strength, my heart. I offer you me, as a friend, as family, if you will have me." Daniel set aside the broken knife he had been sharpening. He reached out and took her hand gently, lifting her to her feet. "No more kneeling," he said softly. "Stand with me." Arissa stood, not as a servant, not as property, but as herself, a survivor, a fighter, a free soul. They packed their few supplies, ready to leave the cave behind. The wasteland stretched endless before them, hard, dangerous. But they were not afraid, because they had each other, and together they could face anything. As they walked side by side into the rising sun, Daniel glanced at her. "You know," he said with a grin, "you're stubborn." Arissa smiled, a true, full smile that lit up her entire face. "Maybe I learned from you," she said. Daniel laughed, a sound that echoed across the broken land. For the first time in years, it wasn't a laugh of bitterness. It was hope. Real hope. They moved forward step by step, past pain, past fear, past chains that no longer held them. Two souls, wounded but unbroken, choosing to walk together into whatever future waited for them. Far behind them, the slavers cursed their loss. Far ahead, dangers and struggles waited. But here, right now, in this moment, they were free. They were strong. They were family. Not built by blood, but built by choice, by sacrifice, by love. And in a universe that too often forgot what those things meant, Daniel and Arissa had created something rare, something invincible, something beautiful. Because sometimes, the strongest bonds aren't forged by chains. They are forged by kindness, by loyalty, by standing together when the world says you should fall. And in the ruins of a broken world, A human and an alien walked side by side, not as master and slave, but as partners, as equals, as something more.